The third major argument that practical argument, people make for state control over policy is that, especially in the modern era, many policies are very complex and it's not easy to figure out how to solve the problems that our country is facing or that a particular state is facing. And often leaders in Washington don't know exactly how to solve a particular problem. By letting states have control over policy, whether it's welfare or the environment or taxes or whatever it is, we are potentially creating 50 labs of policy experimentation. And then we can look around the country and say, hey, Arizona did a great job on this. Maybe other states or maybe the national government could copy it. So for example, when Bill Clinton was president, in 1994, he helped reform welfare, which up until that point, for the last decades, had been really centralized at the national level in Washington, D.C. Most welfare policy was coming out of Washington, D.C. And he helped move that back to the states and give states more control over designing their own welfare policies, food stamps, housing, job training, whatever particular aspect of it was at stake. So the argument was that despite welfare policy having been run primarily out of Washington, D.C. for many years, it hadn't really lowered the poverty rate substantially, and we were still struggling as a country to help people move from state assistance to employment and independence. So maybe if states were experimenting with welfare policies on their own, we would figure out more solutions. Well, we found that states like Minnesota actually did a really good job of incorporating job training and in some cases daycare, much more generous welfare benefits in their reform than states like Arizona did. And as a result, Minnesota was able to move more people from welfare to work and to lower the poverty rate than other states were. The problem is that even in the best case scenario, there's nothing that obligates other states to copy that example. Citizens, voters, people in Minnesota pay higher taxes at the state level for some of those programs than voters in other states. And so even if Minnesota, in this case, could demonstrate that they had a pretty effective welfare program, that doesn't mean other states would even want to copy it. The more important opposing argument to that is that when states make mistakes, the problems in one state inevitably spill over into another state. Spillover is a huge problem. So the policies that states create don't stay within those borders. A poorly designed agricultural policy, for example, might contaminate food or water that gets transported to other places. To use the example of welfare design, if you are living in a state, say North Dakota or South Dakota, that's close enough to Minnesota that you could conceivably move, and Minnesota has a much more generous welfare program, people who need assistance could potentially move. Most obviously in something like environmental policy, if one state mismanages its oil derricks and they get an oil spill, that's going to spread to other states. If they pollute the air doesn't stay within one state, or a river that runs through multiple states. If Nevada mismanages the disposal of its nuclear waste, that has consequences for more than just Nevada. When problems from one state spill over into another state, the federal government will almost inevitably need to come in and solve that problem or try to solve it, and they will have to pay to solve that problem. Most often when problems spill over from one state to another, the state that originated that problem is not going to fix it for everyone else. When the federal government comes in to solve a problem, the money it uses is our federal tax money. So, for example, if Arizona mismanages environmental policy, if the consequences spill over into other states and the federal government has to come in and fix it, we as Californians have paid money to the federal government that then gets used to solve that problem. So if the whole country, if the national government using money from all of us, has to come in and fix the problems that states cause, then it's one argument for letting the national government have more control over that policy to begin with, and limiting the degree to which states can control that policy. Where we think the balance should lie is often very subjective. It depends on the particular issue area, it depends on our personal politics, it depends on the state often in which we are living. One of the really fascinating graphs that you should pay attention to in your textbook looks at which states are net givers of money to Washington and which are net takers. So for example, what that means is some states like California pay more in federal taxes to the national government than we get back in services. But other states like Louisiana or South Carolina pay less in taxes than they get back in services. They are net takers. What's ironic is that most of the states that take more in services from the national government than they give in tax money are states that politically are more conservative and at least rhetorically kind of anti-government or in favor of smaller government. So it's worth thinking about the ways that we all contribute through our tax money to a fund that then is redistributed to different states in the country. And it's an argument for perhaps, since all of us are in some way involved in solving problems that may look like they are localized in a particular state, that we, through the national government, should have more control over policy and set more national standards.